Hi Ravi, let's wait for others to join. Thank you for joining early.
Yeah, thank you. Here. Stand here. You're driving so much.
You're talking to me?
Oh, sorry, not you.
Okay, okay.
Hi, Aarti, can you hear me?
Hi Shrikant, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I'll just make you the co-host.
Okay, let me check Vikram.
And you will be given some assignments post the call so that you should come prepared for the next call, and he will himself come also prepared for.
Pawan, is that you?
So once the ball starts rolling, things will take shape. Yes.
Hi, Vikram.
Hi Vikram.
Happy.
Let me just make you a co-host. Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. Please give us a couple of minutes. We'll start shortly. Let's wait for others to also join.
So what's your expectation?
So while people keep joining, if you have any questions that you would like to, answer later at the point of time in the webinar, do drop us in the chat box. I would love to take them up and post the same for the speakers. So we'll just start in a couple of minutes, maybe. I know Srikanth and Vikram are like waiting. Aarti, what is this? But it will start in 2 more minutes.
No worries. Yeah, we'll wait for the. I see many of them are trickling in now. So yeah.
Yeah, I see folks from Sequoia. I see folks from my startups. I mean, like it's a very vibrant crowd, I feel. Yeah.
Yep.
Good to see you back, Ajay.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
You're still not allowing us full in full strength, right?
Yeah. Looking forward to host you soon at
I
the hub.
hope things get normal.
Yes, soon. Fingers crossed. Sure. Let's just get started. Maybe I'll start with the speaker introductions. One more. Dr. Sunil, if you can mute, that would be great. Thanks. Firstly, thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we head to understanding this holy grail of ESOPs, what is it all about and how it can be aligned with our startup pursuits, and thinking from a startup point of view and how we can make the best out of it, I would love to introduce our speakers for today, Mr. Vikram Shivaraman and Srikanth Prabhu. They are from Team Capita. So I will introduce Vikram Shivaraman is country head India at Capita FinTech. He's a chartered accountant and MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. He has 12 years of experience in investment banking and in organizations including Citigroup and Spark Capital. In his last stint, he has served as CFO to India's leading rural commerce startup. Vikram is passionate about working with and solving problems for founders and startups. Welcome, Vikram, as always.
Thank you. Thanks, Aarti.
Next, we have Mr. Srikanth Prabhu. He heads partnerships in GTM at Capita Fintech. He's an engineer from NIT K. Sukarthala and MBA from IIM Bangalore. He has 10 years of experience in technology, investment banking, and venture capital at organizations like Goldman Sachs and RBS. He was one of the founding members of Social Alpha, an impact-focused investment firm, where he incubated 130 plus startups, led 40 investment, and oversaw 3 plus exits. Welcome, Srikanth. As always, good to host you back together,
Yes, thank
Vikram
you.
and Srikanth, the deadly duo.
Always
Yes,
good,
yes.
good to be back. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I see a chat from Shashi. Yes, we are recording, Shashi. Would love to circulate it back. Yeah, we don't want this knowledge base to go anywhere. Yes, without any further ado, Vikram and Srikanth, over to you. And I have a lot of questions. I mean, in the registration form itself, there are a lot of questions put by founders. Maybe when you like introduce, ESOPs as a concept, there is this one question I would like to like throw it out if you can cover in the introduction.
Sure.
So once again, the question goes like, what is the difference between ESOP, ESPP, and direct equity? So maybe a little lame for, but it's, because our founders, they are like very curious and they want to know. So over to you.
No question is lame, Aarti, and this is a very relevant question, and yeah, we have it covered. So I think Vikram will cover it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We had a lot of these questions ourselves before
Yes.
we joined Capita. So it's a
Can
learning
understand. So here I drop the mic for you guys. Like over to you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Aarti, and pleasure to be in front of all of you today. This is the second time we are in front of DHub with a very, very relevant topic covering ESOPs. So I think thanks, Aarti, for covering the first slide. So I can jump directly into the presentation itself. So our endeavor is through this presentation, through this webinar, to give the founders here a flavor of this whole little bit of a black box called ESOPs. Given how critical they are in terms of scaling organizations, how critical they are for founders as they think through in terms of building their teams and let's say scaling up their businesses to become the next unicorn. So let me start off, and we can keep this interactive. Please feel free to drop your questions in chat. One of us will be speaking and the other person can actually answer those questions on chat itself. If not, we'll leave it into our presentation itself. So I'll start with first principles. So what is really an ESOP, an employee stock option? What is this animal, which we keep hearing about in the news? In corporate finance terms, an ESOP is an option, not an obligation, to purchase the shares of a company. Typically given to employees as per Indian law. An ESOP scheme can only cover employees, can't cover advisors or others. You use different schemes to sort of cover others. It allows the employee to purchase the share of a company at a certain price called a strike price or the exercise price. And is this a right given upfront on day one? No, it is given over a period of time. So if I make a grant of, let's say, 1,000 ESOPs to an employee, then I don't get the right to purchase 1,000 shares of the company today. I will get it over a period of 4 years, let's say 25% every year sort of thing. So this period is called as a vesting period. So what is the real value of an ESOP in the hands of an employee? It can be defined to be the fair market value of the company as on the date in which the question is being asked, less the strike price which the employee needs to pay. So very simply put, I have the right to buy, let's say, a share of a company which could be worth, let's say, 5,000 rupees. My strike price is 500 rupees. So the value of my ESOP and the value of the option is, let's say, 4,500 rupees. Why are ESOPs, why is it critical and why is it assuming a lot of importance, especially over the last 2 years? Just to throw some data points in front of the group. If I just take the 70 unicorns in India, valued at $1 billion and above, the 70 startups which have achieved unicorn status, that represents a value, a market capitalization of $240 billion as on date. Even if I assume 5% of these companies are held by the employees in the form of ESOPs, that represents a wealth potential of $12 billion. Now, unlike investors, who let's say may have made more money than this, this wealth has been created from scratch with zero investment. The investment obviously has been in terms of effort and risk which employees have taken, but there has been more capital invested to get this $12 billion of return. So ESOPs are a powerful tool for wealth creation. They're a powerful tool for founders to attract, motivate, retain talent. Why should founders really think about ESOPs, and why does it really benefit most startups as they sort of go through their sort of scale-up journey? ESOPs help align incentives with value creation. So rather than paying cash salary and paying upfront cash to your employees, you're actually going out and saying that I'm going to give you something which will accrete in value the more valuable my company becomes. So all of us win. It's a win-win for both of us. So you align what you pay to your employees with what value creation happens in the company itself for the founder as well as for the investors. It helps in driving entrepreneurial behavior. Your employees start thinking of themselves as co-creators and co-founders of sorts, rather than a person who's just being given orders and has to carry out those orders. So really, to drive innovation, to drive proactive behavior, and the sense of ownership in the work which employees are doing, ESOPs can play a major role in sort of doing that. It's a powerful tool, like I demonstrated on the previous slide, for employees to participate in upside. The wealth creation potential which can come for an employee through ESOPs is several orders of magnitude higher than what he or she can hope to make in terms of cash salary in most cases. At the same time, from a startup founder's perspective, it's a very useful way to sort of conserve cash. So let's say I'm running a tech startup. I need good talent to help me build my tech product and run my company. I need people who with experience at Microsoft and Google and Facebook. Now, how can I compete with the salaries being given by these MNC giants? I can't, I don't have that much capital. I can't match cash salary. So how do I really attract a person and convince him about what I have to offer as a company? That's where ESOPs can help to make the difference. You don't need to part with upfront cash, which is very, very critical for you and which you need to conserve in your early stages. But you can give out ESOPs and still chart a path of wealth creation for the employee. And again, given that ESOPs are not something which accrue to you on day one, it comes to you over a period of time, over the vesting period. It's an important tool for employee retention as well. Helps you really attract the sort of employees who take a little bit of a long-term view of the role they take playing with the company. So a person who intends to work for 4 or 5 months or 6 months and move out of the company is not going to be as motivated through ESOPs. So if you're looking at ESOPs as a critical element of your compensation, you necessarily will end up attracting people who take a bit of a long. So even if you don't agree with all of what I put out in the slide here, in most cases, when you go for your first round of external equity funding, there will be a requirement and there'll be an obligation on founders and startups to create an ESOP pool, because investors are convinced that without really creating ESOPs, sharing ownership with employees, it's impossible to create a world-class organization. So if ESOPs are so great, how is it that most people are not as aware of how they work, and why is it that we need to have a webinar like this? There are some frictions in adoption of ESOPs and in let's say widespread prevalence of ESOPs among startups. Some of which we are trying to solve here at Capital. So there's a certain, an element of complexity which people perceive in actually getting an ESOP scheme set up. It is understandable. This is something which has a lot of jargon called grant, vesting, excise, etc. But in reality, as hopefully as we run through this presentation, and maybe if you check out our offering, you'll realize that it's actually a very, very simple thing. It can be done in a couple of days, and that is not as complex as it is perceived to be. There's been a limited track record of wealth creation, I would say, until recently. So if I exclude the last 2 years, and if I think about ESOPs, what the common examples which come to mind are the traditional IT services companies, your Infosys, Wipro, where people made a lot of money on ESOPs in the early 2000s. And let's say till 2018, 2019, maybe companies like Flipkart or White Hat Junior, where employees had to wait for an exit event, like a sale or an IPO to happen to actually realize money. More recent case in point of Zomato. However, this sort of trend is changing. We have been tracking close to 50 to 60 instances of ESOP liquidity. So companies which sort of go down the path of saying that I don't need to scale, become big enough and actually do an IPO or a sale. I have to ensure that even before that, my employees see some value in the ESOPs, and let me provide some liquidity and some takeout for them. So wealth creation now, I would really assume that there has been a lot more companies in the news which have come out there because they've announced buyback programs or liquidity programs or ESOPs. Another barrier for ESOPs is the way employees perceive ESOPs. I may be an employee, I may be working in a startup, my startup may be doing well, but in most cases, employees are not aware of what that means for them and what it means for their holding of ESOPs, because the value of the ESOPs are not really properly communicated by companies. So that is a little bit of a barrier, which basically causes the employees to actually doubt if these ESOPs have value. And therefore, if they're not motivated by the ESOPs, the point of giving out ESOPs is lost. There is a realization among startups as well that we actually have to ensure employees understand what they're getting and are motivated by it. Liquidity, like I talked about, there is at least a thought now to provide liquidity in a structured form, or at least provide liquidity as part of a larger round of funding among startups. But yes, just because I have an ESOP and I can potentially have a share of the company, I'm still dealing with a share of an unlisted company. So I can't sell it tomorrow. I can't sell it whenever I sort of please, even if my asset does have value. Taxation regime in the country is a little bit restrictive when it comes to the way they look at ESOP holders. So you are taxed as an employee when you exercise your ESOPs. So basically, when I go after the ESOP is vested, when I go and say, okay, now I want to become a shareholder of the company, please issue a share to me, right? That's when the taxman pretty much comes after the employee. So the unfortunate thing here is that the employee, as we talked about earlier, it's not a liquid share. It's a share of an unlisted company. So there's no ready market for the employee to sell the share and make money and actually pay the tax. So if an employee does go for exercise of an ESOP in an unlisted company, he may need to end up paying tax out of his, let's say salary or out of his savings, which again causes employees to think that, okay, I'm actually paying money. I thought I'm going to make money on ESOPs, but I'm actually having an outflow of cash here. What is really happening? I don't know when this is going to change, but there are ways around this, and there are ways to sort of manage this taxation impact. And finally, a little bit of a mindset issue among founders, a bit of reluctance to share ownership, or a little bit of a fear of loss of control. Again, there are legal structures to put the founders' minds at ease, because founders may have this feeling that, okay, my employees are actually going to become my shareholders. Then are they going to sort of stand up in an AGM and ask me questions and question the way I'm running this company? There are ways to sort of manage this entire thing. But yes, more than loss of control, the founders should think about what the employees are getting and the speed at which they can scale. So the benefits, I would say, outweigh the risks in this case. So what is the real life cycle of ESOPs, and what are all the jargon which are associated with ESOPs? I think we should have a run through of that. So let's say as a founder, you have probably sort of raised your first round of funding. And like I mentioned before, you will pretty much see a clause if you're raising external equity to actually create an ESOP pool. So the first step when you think about implementing ESOPs in the company is to create a pool, which in a lot of cases, if you have raised capital, already may have happened. You may have an obligation in your shareholder agreement to say, I have to create a pool of 5% or 10%, etc. If not, you basically think about a certain pool, either 5%, 10%, whatever you feel is right. And actually set aside a certain portion of your company for the ESOP pool. Once you've thought through as to how much you want to set aside for employees, the next step is to draft a legal document called an ESOP scheme or an ESOP plan. So this is again is something which people have to work with lawyers, advisors to do it. There are a lot of resources available to actually get this done very quickly. And in most cases, a very standard plain vanilla ESOP scheme works for most early stage startups. So the founder needs to think about, I think after the pool has been created, the founder needs to think about what to price the ESOPs, what sort of excise price, what should I ask my employees to pay for the share which they sort of getting. Once the scheme is drafted and it's in final form, it has to be sort of adopted by the board and shareholders of the company. Then once that process is done, you are ready and your scheme is set up and you're ready to start directing. So the manner in which you communicate the ESOPs to your employees, actually give the ESOPs to the employees, known as grant. It's defined as grant. This is, traditionally this has been done with a physical grant letter. So you actually have a letter to the employee where you lay out all the terms of the grant, and the employee is supposed to read it and understand. But yes, with the software systems, the grant actually can be done digitally, and it can be done in a digital format. So typically, once you set up an ESOP scheme, you will do it maybe after 1 to 3 years after the company is started. You may have to cover a bunch of your ex-employees, a bunch of your initial early stage employees as a one-time bulk grant of sorts. But you may actually have a system to say that, okay, anyone who is joining in at this level and above, let's say at the vice president level and above, will be entitled to ESOPs, and you may start making grants as and when people join the company. Once grants have been done, the period really, the timer starts on the vesting period. So, what in most cases we have observed is it's either a 3-year or a 4-year vesting period, where, and in most cases, traditionally, people have thought about vesting on the basis of time and mostly on a yearly basis. So you can, but there are other ways of thinking about vesting as well. You, in addition to time, to say that, okay, you have to be with me for 3 years or 4 years to actually get installments of ESOPs vested. There may also be performance-based vesting. You may go to, let's say, your head of sales and say that, okay, if you achieve a certain degree of sales, you will get this, let's say, tranche of ESOPs, or you will get a higher allocation of ESOPs. If not, you don't. You can make it time-based or performance-based. As per Indian law, there's a minimum cliff of 12 months from the time you make the grant to the time of first vesting. So the cliff is basically this time gap. Just to ensure that you're not looking at ESOPs as a means of just giving shares to the company, giving shares to your employees. So let's say having a 1 month or a 2 month or a 6 month vesting period doesn't sort of cut it. You'll have to give a 12-month gap between the date the grant is made and the date of first vesting. And like I talked about, traditionally people have thought about vesting in yearly installments, but that is done more from an administrative convenience perspective. If you are using software to manage ESOPs, you can think of a more aggressive vesting on a quarterly or even a monthly basis, just to give that additional nudge to employees that, yes, I'm actually accruing ESOPs on a monthly basis, similar to my cash salary. Then after vesting, after the ESOP is vested, the employee has the right to ask for exercise. So there are a couple of options available here. You can allow the employees to exercise, and you can tell them that, yes, 5 years or 4 years from the time your ESOPs are vested, anytime you can come back and you can ask me for to actually convert this ESOP into a share and become a shareholder in my company. But like I said, there is a taxation implication here, which may be difficult for employees to sort of understand and actually pay. So a lot of startups, they have started restricting exercise, and they have started telling their employees that, okay, we will allow you to vest, and that's going to happen as per schedule. But once you have a vested ESOP in hand, please don't come for exercise, because the moment you exercise, it's bad for you. You have to pay tax, and I have to collect tax from you and pay it to the government. And I have to go through a process of issuing a share to you, etc. Through all this, I don't have any visibility on when you will actually get an exit, when you can actually cash out on these shares. So a lot of companies restrict exercise and say that we will allow you to exercise your vested ESOP only when I provide liquidity, or only when a liquidity event happens. Either when I'm going for an IPO, or let's say we are going to sell the company, or I get a new round of funding and my investor, let's say wants to take over some stake from them. So in these events, I'll allow you to exercise. If not, you better hang on to your vested ESOP. You still have the value in it. Nothing is changing for you. Just said I'm helping you avoid tax. When you don't have the cash from the share in your hand. And as with everything, the cycle really completes for an employee when they actually monetize and when they sell the share. So that's when the entire value cycle of ESOPs, right from time of pool creation to the time of exit happens. So a few, let's say, rules of thumb in terms of the way founders think about ESOPs. We get asked these questions a lot as people think about their ESOP scheme, to say that, okay, whom should I cover in my ESOP scheme, and how much should I think about granting? What is the right number to grant? So there is no hard and fast rule here, but just a few, let's say, parameters and constraints which founders should think about. So if I look at how much should I grant to a certain employee or to my set of employees, the constraint here is a pool size. So you've decided on a certain pool with your investors, let's say 5% or 10%. To exceed this pool, or to sort of go ahead, go beyond this pool, you will have to go back to investors and get their consent again. So then they may ask you questions to say, okay, then why did you create such a small pool? Then are you going to dilute me by creating a new pool? Can you do it without diluting me? A lot of questions get asked. So it's important to think about a pool to say that, okay, I have a certain pool. Now I have to make my pool last, at least in my next major round of funding. At which point of time, maybe I can have this conversation with my investors to say that, yes, I'm doing a larger round at a higher valuation. Please allow me to increase the pool. So I'm limited by the total pool size in terms of stake, in terms of the number of shares. How do founders and how do employees also just think about ESOPs? So the way you typically communicate it to an employee is, when you're hiring an employee, to say that, okay, you have a certain annual CTC. Now I'm giving you 100% of the CTC in the form of ESOPs, or 150 or 200% of the CTC in the form of ESOPs of upfront value today. Yes, but those ESOPs you're going to get it vested over a period of 3 or 4 years. So it's just a means of representing the ESOPs to tell an employee that, okay, if I'm hiring you for, let's say, 15 lakhs, I'm giving you ESOPs for 20 lakhs or 15 lakhs or something like that. Now, why is it important, especially at an early stage, to show a certain upfront value? So the very traditional way of thinking about ESOPs is that I should price my ESOPs. I should set my exercise price or a strike price at the last round valuation, so that when the ESOPs are actually granted, it is actually valued at zero. Right? That's the very corporate finance way of looking at it, because you tell the employee that today I'm giving you something which won't have value, but you're going to get it over a period of 3-4 years. Now it's your job to increase the value of the company, thereby increase your own value and increase your own value of ESOPs. Having said that, a lot of early stage companies don't do that. They underprice their ESOPs. They price it at a very low price, or they price it at a significant discount to their last round valuation, just to sort of give an upfront value to the employee, to actually say that, okay, I'm actually giving you ESOPs for 50 lakhs today, because I'm giving you the price is, let's say, 1,000 based on my last round, and I'm allowing you to buy it for 100 rupees. Right? The reason for this is that typically at early stage startups, you will have to hire people at a discount to their market salary. So if that's the case, then there is a certain sacrifice the employee is making by working with you, and you're trying to use ESOPs as a means to bridge that sacrifice even upfront. To tell the employee that, okay, you're worth 20 lakhs in the market, I'm paying you 50 lakhs today, but I'm giving you 10 lakhs worth of ESOPs. So net, you're actually higher than what maybe some of your peers are doing. But what's also critical is that the ESOPs will also accrete in value. So even as time goes by, even though you will continue to be at a discount, you will, on a wealth basis, be more than what your peers have sort of. So that's one way of communicating it, which is why most early stage startups may underprice their ESOPs. And another way of thinking about ESOP allocation for an employee is to say that, okay, for this person's seniority and for the value which this person is adding to my organization, what am I really giving this person from an exit perspective? To really think about, to say that, okay, I'm giving ESOPs today with let's say a 4-year vesting. I'm hopeful in 4 years that I'll do a Series B or a Series C and provide some sort of exit to this employee. Then, is it good that this employee is worth, let's say, 50 lakhs at the time of that exit? Is it something which will excite them? And is it something which is fair? So another way to really think about what value you are creating in the company and what value actually goes to the employee, and for you to take a call to say that, does it really make sense for you as well as for the employee? Also, while bearing in mind that, there is a certain risk which the employee is taking by working in a startup. So they should get something more than what their peers, let's say at Microsoft or Google, are making. Right? So that's one way of looking at it. It won't be exact, it won't be perfect, but these are a few parameters in which founders can think about as they think about their ESOP quantum. Now, who should be covered under the ESOPs? Traditionally, people look at your key management personnel, your CXO level people, or your one-downs. Just because, the traditional way of thinking is that give ESOPs to people who can actually influence the value of the company and the valuation of their shares itself. But having said that, today, a lot of companies are being very inclusive. They want to cover a big section of their employees through ESOPs, even employees in a support function, or even employees who are at a, let's say, entry-level managerial roles, things like that. Just to have a buzz around it, have the sense of ownership among employees, even if they're not directly driving the value. So two schools of thought. You can choose to put yourself in either this extreme or that extreme, but that's where I would say the poles lie. Tenure, again, people who have been with you longer, you would want to incentivize them a lot more. And people who are looking at a slightly long-term vision with you, you would definitely want to cover them your ESOPs. What is critical as you think about granting ESOPs is that employees should really understand the value of these ESOPs. So communication, as I talked about before, becomes very key here. If employees don't, appreciate the ESOPs, they don't understand it, and if the company doesn't communicate this in the right manner and motivate them in the right manner through the ESOPs, then the point of giving ESOPs is lost. Then you'll have an employee who's just going to have ESOPs, let it accrue, let it vest, and might jump ship, just leaving back all the ESOPs. So it's important to really communicate this and ensure that the employees understand the value of ESOPs. So I'll pause here and turn it over to Shrikant. But before that, maybe I'll just spend just a minute on some of the questions which were asked for with respect to different ESOP structures. So what is the difference between, let's say, an ESOP, an employee stock purchase plan, and maybe things like sweat equity? I won't go too deep into this. Maybe I'll leave it open for questions, and as people have questions, we can cover some of these things.
And Vikram, there was also a question on how can we give stock to consultants. So you can also cover some of the other, aspects here. Bring that. Yeah.
Perfect. So maybe I'll spend 5 minutes here. So like I said, in most cases, if your intent is to cover employees, a standard ESOP scheme is what makes sense. One can consider what is known as a SAR, a stock appreciation right, or a phantom stock, to cover consultants, advisors, non-employees, basically. So what is an SAR or a phantom stock? It operates similar to an ESOP scheme, but it's not regulated, which is why I can give it to whomever I sort of want to. But it basically, if I issue one unit of SAR, I link it in terms of value to the share price, which is why it operates very similar to an ESOP scheme. But the difference here is that there is no actual share being issued. You will settle the employee in cash. So if I were to draw a parallel to say that, okay, I'm going to issue 1,000 units of SAR to an employee, and I tell the employee that, okay, this is going to vest for you over a period of 4 years. At the end of the 5th year, whatever is the share price at that point of time, less whatever is the strike price I've given you, I will pay that amount to you in cash, and thereby I will settle your SARs. So net, you have got an equity upside in my company. You have seen the share price rise, and maybe you've contributed to it, and you're getting the upside of it directly in cash. Effectively, all I'm doing is I'm cutting out a few steps in the process here. Now, the benefits of doing something like this, one, in terms of regulatory compliances, there are not as many constraints as you have with the ESOP scheme. I can cover non-employees. I don't have constraints with respect to vesting period and things like that. Effectively, this is what the employee cares about. The share, it's very nice, but at the end of the day, I want the share to convert into cash. So I'm skipping the share element and giving you against the cash directly. What are the flip sides of an SAR is that one, you are not able to, you have to actually ensure that you have the cash to meet this obligation. So if I'm going to tell employees 4-year vesting, by the 5th year, I'll do a takeout for you. I need to ensure I have cash in the 5th year, right? Because unlike an ESOP, so in an ESOP, I can give an employee a share, and I can tell the employee, that's it, you have to wait for liquidity. So I also hold a share in the company as a founder, and I'm waiting for an IPO to happen. So you also need to wait, right? There is no obligation to provide liquidity in an ESOP scheme, but there's an obligation to actually give out cash in an SAR scheme. So you have to ensure that you have cash with you, which is why an SAR may be a very good option for companies which are very sure in the next 2, 3, 4 years, by the time this takeout date comes, they're very sure of generating cash flows, being profitable, etc. Those could, like SaaS companies, for example, these could be good companies where an SAR can be considered. So one way to cover advisors is through an SAR. Another way to do it is through something like sweat equity, right? So in sweat equity, basically you are allotting shares in the company to your advisors or to your employees on day one. So there is no option here. You're giving them shares, but you're giving them shares at a steep discount to the actual FMB, or you're giving them shares at the face value at 10 rupees or so, right? There are some, let's say, regulatory compliances which you need to sort of follow for sweat equity. For example, there's a certain lock-in. There's only a certain quantum which you can actually give out as sweat equity, 15% of capital or 5 crore. And the other little bit of a flip side with sweat equity is that there is no vesting here. So I may trust an advisor to do something, and I may issue sweat equity to that advisor. Then if the advisor doesn't deliver, what do I do? Right? There are ways to move around this. You can have a clawback provision. You can have a clawback mechanism. You can actually do the allotment of sweat equity after he achieves certain things. So these are a few ways in which you can make sweat equity, still make your advisors accountable, while still giving them an equity upside and making them shareholders in the company. So that is again a sort of a workable alternative. A stock purchase scheme again is not so common, I would say. So rather than giving an ESOP, employees are given an option to purchase shares of the company at let's say a discounted price or a lower price. So this again is recognized by the Companies Act, recognized by regulations as a stock incentive plan. And especially with listed companies and several companies which are fairly mature, they may actually tie up with NBFCs and other financial institutions to provide loans for actually purchasing this share. And there are lock-ins here as well. Again, the flip side of an ESPS is that there's no vesting. You are giving the employees are becoming shareholders on day one. So after they become shareholders, if they quit and move outside, they still continue to enjoy the upside on those shares, which is something which you as a company should be fine with. Another reason why people may prefer sweat equity or ESPS is just in terms of simplicity. I don't have options and I don't have an obligation to sort of issue shares. It's very straightforward. These people become my shareholders. I can see them on my cap table. So some founders just find it a bit easier to understand. And they say that, okay, if my intent is to give this guy a benefit through shares, why don't I just give the shares to him? But that's, I would say, slightly old-fashioned thinking. ESOPs work fine for the most part. Hopefully that answers the question. Anything else, Shrikant, which I have covered?
Actually, I think some of these can be covered. So one was on ESOP valuation. So I addressed saying you have methodologies, basically option value methodology to calculate the value, and then that basically goes into basically amortizing the expense schedule every year. So again, there are standard systems, and again we also support that. So we can maybe let Ajay let us know if you have any follow up on that ESOP valuation. Vikram, there are a couple more questions on one ESOPs incorporated in US entity and for India, perhaps Indian subsidiaries. So maybe you can cover that.
Sure. So as far as US entity is concerned,
yeah.
Yes. So ideally, the best practice and the common practice is to keep your ESOP scheme in the entity in which you have raised capital. So where you have investors, that's the best place to sort of situate your ESOP scheme. You may, let's say, have a US subsidiary, you have raised capital in the US. You may have you may have a US entity, you have raised capital in the US, which is a holding company, and the subsidiary could be in India. Some people have come and asked that, then can I actually set up an ESOP scheme in India? You can, but then where is the value getting captured? Is it in the US entity? Is it an India entity? How do I determine the value of the India entity tomorrow if I want to do a takeout of the ESOPs? And how can I actually do a takeout of the ESOPs? Because ideally, when you have investors on the cap table, that is an entity where you can secure an exit, where you can you can list that entity, or you can sort of sell that entity, and everyone gets an exit, right? So it creates complications if I set up multiple obligations. So I have an obligation to give investors an exit in the US, but I have an obligation to give my employees, ESOP holders, an exit in India. So that's a little bit complicated, not to say it's not being done, but it's just easier for everyone if you situate your ESOPs, investors all in the same entity where you have shareholding, and everything else can be 100% subsidiary. If you are, you can very well set up a company in the US, implement an ESOP scheme in the US, and cover your international employees and give them ESOPs in the US sort of entity. Yeah, but you will need to follow the US regulations. There are some very specific regulations as to how ESOPs should be structured, which may vary across states as well. I won't go too deep into that, but yes, this is possible. In some sense.
Yeah, there's another question in the chat window. In sweat equity, does the existing investors' shareholding also goes down?
Yes. So yes, it will go down because sweat equity is a fresh issue of shares. So your shareholding base increases, so it dilutes everybody else on the cap table. In an ESOP, mostly the investors tell you to create the ESOP pool before their investment. So by that you create the ESOP pool, and the investors come in, their stake doesn't change. But for whatever reason, if I do a sweat equity after I receive funding from an investor, then that's why I need investor approval for that, because their shareholding is going
Great. There is one question from my Faisal. So Shashi, it would be good if you can unmute and speak, because this is quite
so
nuanced.
Right, it's a typical experience movie. I'm a second-time serial entrepreneur. So the last time what I did is I created a company, and in US, and I could able to that will have a 10 million shares, and 10% was the ESOPs reserve. So I could able to leverage that and then did that. But now this time I've already sold the product, by the way. So this time it's a pretty Indian entity. There is no connection to the US.
Got it.
Still, again, the 10% reserved ESOPs that we have actually thought of, but I don't really know, because 100K shares is what you get in India.
Right.
It's not 10 million shares in India. So how do we? Otherwise, we'll have to go for a limited company, listed at a limited company, or unlisted but limited company. So how do we actually tackle such kind of situations? And I really, really wanted to understand this in my case, pretty
Yeah.
Indian
So the
startup.
question basically is number of shares. Basically, you have not a lot of shares to play around with to
Yeah,
give
yeah,
ESOPs
yeah,
equitably to many.
right.
Actually, there are some solutions we have seen here. So one is actually there could be a ratio, and maybe we can also add. I have seen ESOP policies where the options are actually rolling up to few shares, right? So there's a ratio like 10:1, or I've also seen an ESOP policy where that ratio is 10,000:1. So you can actually create as many options, but just that it will then convert into shares basis that ratio. So in that way, you will have more kind of liquidity in some sense to give out ESOPs in terms of units or options. And obviously, the conversion to shares will happen as per the predefined ratio, which is there in the policy document. So we have such policy templates. So you can reach out to us, Shashi.
Yeah, and the way in which this happens is that see, at the end of the day, when I exercise ESOPs, and when I get shares, I can only get shares in integers. I can't get fractional shares. So if I, let's say, have like Srikanth mentioned, 10:1 conversion, and I have like 55 ESOPs. So 5.5 shares is what the employee is entitled to get, but I can't give the employee 0.5 shares. So what companies end up doing is that they give 5 shares when exercise happens. Eventually, there'll be some exit. At the time of exit, they settle these employees in cash. So they tell the employee, okay, you have 0.5. You have 5 ESOPs which are convertible into 0.5 shares. I can't give you 0.5 shares, but I will give you half a share worth in terms of value when an exit actually happens. So either when an investor comes in or when an IPO happens, I will ensure that cash is paid out to you to that extent. So that's one means by which people can handle fractional shares and fractional ESOPs. If your share capital base is not large enough to accommodate ESOPs. Yeah, I mean, even in that case, ultimately, I don't think employees care as to how many shares they get. What really matters for them is the value. So if I have one share worth 5 lakhs, then I have 5 lakhs worth of value. So I'm actually happy. That's one way of handling it. And in India, there's no restriction on you having a company with 10 million shares or 100 million shares. I think the only challenge will be in the filing fee which you need to pay. It's a little bit more expensive. You have to pay more money to the ROC. If you have a company with a paid up capital of, let's say, 100 crore versus paid up capital of 1 crore, right? So most companies prefer to keep a very minimal number of shares and keep the paid up capital a bit low. But as they scale up, as the share becomes more and more valuable, we have seen companies do share splits. So they start by a 10 rupee face value share. Then the fair market value of the share goes into 1 lakh and 10 lakhs and things like that. Then they do 1:10 split. So at that point of time, you will actually have the money to pay the ROC. The not paying filing fees is more a very early stage company, sort of phenomenon. And I can see that someone has actually done a 1 paisa share as well. I think that's
Right.
news
So I
for me.
think
Max have seen is 1 rupee, so
yeah,
it's learning for us.
but I guess Shashi, we can solve in multiple ways. Like we mentioned, we can define a ratio. We can have a better, granular face value and things like that. So yeah, maybe we can take this up offline if you are interested to know
I
more
shall
about
reach out. I shall reach out. I really
Perfect.
need a
Perfect.
solution around it.
Lovely.
Yeah, on that note, for startups who are interested to have a one-on-one conversation with Srikanth and Vikram, do drop me a message. I think almost everybody know me and they have their mail ID. If someone doesn't know me and don't have my mail ID, I would love to drop in the chat window and do hit me a hi. We'll facilitate the one-on-one conversation. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Aarti. You have been kind enough to do that the last time as well. So thank you again. So great. So I think, yeah, like Vikram mentioned, I think we've addressed all the questions. Feel free to keep them coming, because that will be the most important thing to do, because that way we solve. But now I would like to give a little more practical perspective of how ESOPs can be managed, to give you a little bit idea. So one is actually talk about this life cycle in a way. Vikram did touch upon this. So what I will do is, we, as Aarti also introduced us, we are both from Capita, and we basically breathe cap tables and ESOPs on a daily basis. So in a way, I would like to maybe just share whatever Vikram explained through a platform, right? And how you can experience setting up ESOPs, etc., through a platform itself. So and also walk through this whole life cycle of structuring the ESOPs on day one, taking all the compliances, approvals, etc., and then managing the ESOPs once the ESOPs are in the system, right? So how do you keep issuing ESOPs to the newer employees, keep topping up ESOPs to your existing employees, and how the vesting schedules, the various elements like cliff, etc., gets managed. And then of course completing the circle will be the exercise events where employees can convert their options to shares, and then of course liquidity is when they actually make the money, right? So this entire journey can actually be tracked. So I'll give you a quick so Aarti, if you can allow me to share the screen. Oh, I think I can, yeah. So I'll just
You can.
yeah, I can, yeah. So I can I wanted to quickly so I hope you are able to see my login screen. So I wanted to give you a quick sense of how it works for a startup. So this is our platform. You can this is an equity management platform. So we help manage cap tables, ESOPs for startups, and also the underlying transactions. We have just to give a quick snapshot. You can manage your cap tables. All kinds of complicated instruments can be managed. Scenarios can be run. You can convert your you can see your cap table on a fully diluted basis, fully converted basis, add a bunch of scenarios. ESOPs are managed within the cap table. We have a data room where you can manage all your documents, so you will always be financing ready or investment ready. We manage all transactions so that you can actually build your cap table from the underlying transactions. So these are all things to ensure there is good kind of governance and good controls in place to keep your data intact and share it with the stakeholders. These are all very sensitive information, and you know uh, investors, stakeholders, employees would want accurate piece of information, and that's how our platform can come in. So double clicking on ESOPs, right? So equity awards here represent ESOPs. So we have a platform to kind of manage the entire life cycle of ESOPs that Vikram kind of took all of you through. So right from on day one, if you already have ESOPs, you can manage a dashboard like this. Look at your how much headroom you have available. Access all the ESOP holders in a single view. Click on what they have received. Their grant details, all of this. Let me actually show you how all of this is done, right? So on day one, after your shareholder agreement is completed, obviously the one of the conditions precedent to you know closing is to actually resolve that you will create ESOP. So you will obviously resolve at a board level that you will create a policy. You will pass that policy at the board level and the shareholder level. And once the policy is passed, which is the ESOP has been implemented by the company, it is available to be granted. And that is when you can actually come to this platform. You can create an award plan on the platform itself. We have certain templates basis which you can answer the key variables like what's the name of the plan, which class the options convert to, what's the plan size, the approvals that are very important. Many a times I've seen a lot of founders saying I want to give ESOPs, but they don't have an underlying policy, nor have they taken a board approval, which basically means that legally there is no ESOP policy in your company. As much as you have verbally promised it, it doesn't mean anything. Especially this is a input to employees. So do ask for these aspects, do ask for the policy document, do ask for the grant letters that are given to you, right? The term of the ESOPs, vesting schedules. So you can actually create a template for a vesting schedule. Now, most common vesting schedule we have seen is a 4-year vesting schedule. So you have a mandatory cliff of 12 months. And then let's say you want to vest 25% post the cliff. And then you can annually vest the remaining in 3 more tranches. So in this way, I can automatically create a 4-year vesting schedule, which most commonly startups use. But nowadays, because of systems like ourselves, you can actually have more frequent vesting also. Like you can have quarterly vesting or monthly vesting. In a way, these are just employee friendly practices to tell employees that, hey, we intend to give you more and more ESOPs. Although, in absolute sense, you're not losing out by having such friendly policies, because you're only giving the same amount of ESOPs. You can have ESOP trusts. I think Vikram might have covered it. It's for early stage companies, we feel it is not relevant. It's mostly practiced in the public markets or public companies where you want to, you also have the tradability there, a little more liquidity. We also separation details. This is also extremely important aspect of ESOP structuring, right? So what happens if employees leave? Because no matter what kind of a startup it is, people come and go, right? It's a very, obviously maybe there are good startups where people retain for a long time, but there's some amount of churn. So what happens to these ESOPs if people leave under various circumstances like voluntary termination, cost based, other ways? And what happens to the unvested awards which are not earned by the employees? So in case of death, we have seen a lot of policies where you accelerate the vesting because you want to give the advantage to the nominee of the the employee who has expired. While vested typically are given, they have earned the shares, but there are cases where you can force the exercise. You can actually say, okay, you have to exercise in the next 3 months, otherwise you'll forfeit the shares. Or in case of a termination with cause, you can actually have a zero exercise month, like you can actually not give them a chance to exercise as well. Or there are many benevolent founders and benevolent policies where you give an infinite time to exercise, or give like 10 years to exercise. All these, like Vikram mentioned, this basically becomes more tax friendly to the employees, because they don't have to shell out taxation if they choose to exercise. And hence I have seen a lot of my own colleagues and founders, I mean my peers from my who have forfeited their shares because they were not able to pay the upfront capital. Maybe those shares would have earned them a lot in the future. So these are all structure based decisions that founders need to navigate through. And trust me, we are in a stage where if you don't create a employee friendly policy, you might not be able to attract the right talent. So we are also living in a world where employees, good quality people are need to be retained and attracted. So a good ESOP policy is a very good way to do that, right? So these are some of the plan level structuring that you need to do, and we help you with this decision making as well. We also reflect any industry benchmarks that are followed. Once you have plans, you can manage plans. Like this is a demo account, so you have multiple company plans maintained here. But typically in a early stage startup, I don't see you having more than 2 or 3 plans. Maybe you can have one for senior leadership, one for engineering talent, and things like that, if you want to structure it differently. And you can give out ESOPs on the same system. We are an API first company, so you can actually integrate any HRMS, HR management systems to pick up your latest set of employees, tag them as employees, select the right ESOP plan you want to give to that employee, right? Select the grant date, and typically the exercise price is decided at the time of giving ESOPs. You might have a standard policy in the company that I'm giving at face value, then it can be like INR 10 or SGD1 or whatever, right? This is a Singapore based company. And you can also indicate the ESOPs here. If you indicate higher, it will also alert you that you don't have that much pool size. Let's say I put 1,000 options. Because I have already selected the ESOP policy, it automates the vesting schedule for me, right? I can further override the vesting schedule, and here is where we recommend startups to maybe even do monthly vesting. So this is a very nice pool where 25% I'm vesting upfront, and then every month I'm vesting for the next 3 years. So this way I'm making it very equitable vesting. And employees, even if they want to leave, they are not it's not that they have to wait for a year and things like that. It's just more friendly posturing to the employees in some sense. Separation details is where you can override, like we already discussed. This all comes from the policy document, what you have already configured, but here you can further override in an employee on a case-to-case basis. Any additional feeds, typically like Vikram spoke about taxation. So you need to understand what the tax bracket of the employee is, what nationality the employee. So even if it is a US plan, if the employee is in India, the obligation of tax withholding comes in the local local Indian entity, right? So you will have to comply by the income tax rules. So you will have to do the TDS withholding. So you will have to know the tax bracket of the employee and withhold the tax based on the exercise price, and the difference between the face value, the exercise price, and the fair market value, which is treated as income. So these things, these configurations basically help you do that. And then we also have a complete automated digital system. So you don't need to have any paperwork. You can enable acceptance and have digital signature based acceptance. So the employee also doesn't need to log in. I mean, doesn't need to print and sign and scan. Everything is digital, and it is through digital signatures. So this way, maintaining, managing ESOPs are extremely easy. This is the kind of view employees also see before they accept the ESOPs itself, before they digitally sign the ESOPs. And last thing I wanted to show you was how this workflow operates for an employee themselves, right? So employee can log in. They get a very personalized dashboard. They don't see the sensitive information. They only see their ESOPs, how much ESOPs they have got, how much is the invested vested aspect. We also give a gamified way of telling that, okay, if the company is doing well and it's increasing its value over a period of time, how much do they stand to gain basis the ESOPs they have today. Like, and this is the value of the ESOPs. They also need to realize that they have to purchase the shares. Like, this is a common misconception that Vikram also mentioned earlier, that people actually have to buy. It's not free money. So they have free shares. They have to buy the shares. So what's the cost of exercise of the vested unvested component, and what's the gains pre-tax? We're also including gains post-tax based on the jurisdiction. Like Indian employees will have a different tax rate and things like that. And you can also do a bunch of operations in your equity awards dashboard where you see grant level details. So if I have received multiple grants, and this employee has been our favorite employee because all the demo we give this employee grants, so that's why he has many grants. So you can actually do a bunch of activities here. You can choose to exercise your vested options here. You can include your demat details, so we can also issue the shares to the demat accounts of the employees. And you can choose that out of the vested pools across various plans, which are the ones I want to exercise. This is the act of converting my options to shares. And then they become shareholders on the cap table, right? And you can add a bunch of FAQs and good practices and demystifying ESOPs, etc. for your employees here. We also do town halls for companies when they are introducing ESOPs to their employees, right? So these are a bunch of things that this was just to bring whatever Vikram mentioned in a more academic sense and theoretical sense to more in how it works practically. What we are building very shortly is the liquidity workflow. So you can actually run a buyback program on our system tomorrow. We can also help find capital for that. Many a times investors themselves buy out the ESOPs as part of secondary or as part of a company buyback program. But we also can find external capital from, because everyone wants to invest in startups, and we are driving that liquidity very shortly, where we can actually find buyers for your ESOPs or vested ESOPs or exercised options to shares, and give that value possibility to your employees, because unless you show money to your employees, they might not value your ESOPs. So we can also get into the cycle of what we call as predictable liquidity in, ensuring ESOPs generate the value that they are supposed to, right? So I'll take a pause, and this is the kind of offering and things we have, and we also are pioneering a very unique concept. And I just wanted to share one last thing before we can open out for any more questions, is this concept of equity payslip. So this is something very new that we have launched. We already have a few companies using this. This is also um, making it a very formal thing, communication from the management of the company to your employees that, hey, we value ESOPs, we intend to give you value, and this is a proof of that we are giving you periodically a sense of the value creation that you have created nominally in some sense. But we also then we would indicate that in the next 6 months we will do a buyback program, etc. So you can use this placeholder to impress upon your employees the importance you're giving out to ESOPs and the value creation you have in mind. Because if the company generates value, you also want your employees to generate that value. So these are all ways in which you can engage your employees, and very happy to roll this out to the participants here for your own startups. And we also have a special offering which I also want to share, that we have a partnership with T-Hub, so you can avail these offers. You can reach out to Aarti or us, and we can give early stage startups. We have a free product offering to you, to all of you, who anyone raising less than $1 million. We have a free offering. We have discounts beyond that, and we have a bunch of goodies to give thanks to this partnership. So I'll take a pause, and if there are any questions, we can.
Yeah, I think just a couple more questions which came up. I'll just quickly cover them.
Please go ahead.
That. So one was on, should I create a different class of shares for my ESOPs? Again, fairly uncommon, because you create different classes of shares to give superior rights to your investors. And in most cases, your ESOP holders don't have even voting rights. Your scheme itself will say that you may have an ESOP convertible into a share, but it doesn't mean that you have voting rights. It doesn't mean you can come and vote in meetings. Technically speaking, one can think of differential voting rights, tell the employees that, okay, I am going to give you a share, but it's only going to have 1/10 of the voting right as a regular share. But it's still a bit of a hassle. It's an easier way just to restrict exercise, to tell never let the employee become a shareholder in the first place, and tell the employee that I'll let you become a shareholder only when you're going to sell the share to another investor. So for a day, you're going to become a shareholder. I'll allow you to exercise. Immediately the next day you will sell, and you will realize cash. In most cases, employees are not concerned. They don't understand. They won't even bother with exercising rights as a shareholder. They just want the economic interest, and they want the cash upside, right? So it's just an easier thing to restrict exercise. That is one question I think which came up. Another question I think from Anjali with respect to how you calculate ESOP quantum. So several factors go into it. It's not necessary you have to sort of think of it to say, okay, if I'm giving so much CTC to a person, I have to give 100% or 200% of CTC sort of thing. It is just easier to represent your ESOP grant if you talk about it in that manner. So it's easier to say that, okay, I'm hiring you at 15 lakh sort of salary CTC, and I'm giving you 100% of your CTC as an ESOP, which vests over 4 years. Rather than saying that, you're getting 1,000 shares, 1,000 ESOPs. Because again, like I talked about before, I don't understand what the 1,000 ESOPs mean. I don't have a number to put to it. And that may not excite me as much as knowing that potentially 100% of my salary is being given to me in an ESOP grant. And potentially that can become like 3x, 4x, 5x as the company scales. So that's the reason why people represent it as a CTC, but calculating it can be based on multiple things, as you said. Not necessarily I have to base it on the CTC. Yeah, I think those are the only two questions.
And we also have a very detailed template, Anjali, for this actually. And we do these as, quick half-an-hour sessions, and we offer it completely complimentary. Again, you can sign up for it, where I can actually give you a glimpse of it. So we do a very detailed exercise of understanding your hiring needs, then like Vikram mentioned, attribute value at a percentage basis or at a value basis, or an opportunity cost, maybe because you need to give ESOPs because you're not paying in cash enough, so you'll have to give that. So we have a very detailed value and create a custom ESOP pool for, is your pool size enough? And these are the questions we help address. So happy to run these clinics for you guys whenever if there's any request for that. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Kapita is everything that you guys need, thinking of ESOPs and the entire cap management. And as Srikanth and Vikram both mentioned, it's free for early stage startups who are in the call, or your friends who know in the Founders Network. I've already dropped in my mail. If you would like to have a conversation, one-on-one conversation, then take it across. Just drop me a mail or message if you have my number. But do shoot me up. Yeah, with that, I open the floor for questions. If you have questions, do let me, just put it in the chat window or just wave a hi. I would love to unmute you guys and you can talk. Any questions?
So one quick question I had.
Yeah, Chaitanya.
Chaitanya again. Hey, thank you so much
Yes.
for answering my question. Sincerely appreciate all of you, Tia and Vikram and another founder. Sorry, apologies. Yeah. So my question is, and Srikanth. So my question is, one of the things is basically giving liquidity to our employees, right? So what are the best practices? So because, for example, at this point in time, we don't have any external investors. We have just some friends and family. We don't necessarily intend to raise more capital, right? Because we don't necessarily have to. So I'm really thinking. So so I mean, I don't know. Basically, this is a question out of ignorance. You guys know it better, so I'm asking you: what are the best ways to give liquidity to employees once shares vest?
So maybe I'll cover some of what is happening, some of what we've seen happen, and some of what is happening, and maybe we can give you some sense of how you can approach it as well. So like I said, till 2 years back, there was no concept of ESOP liquidity. If you are an ESOP holder, you are on the same level as the founder. The founder holds shares. Whenever the founder gets an exit or whenever the investors get an exit is when the employees get an exit, right? So I may vest my ESOPs over 3 years or 4 years, but it takes a company 7 years, 10 years, 12 years to grow big enough, go for an IPO or actually get themselves sold. So in most cases, employees actually had to stay back and wait for that period to pass by before they actually saw returns on their ESOPs. That was one reason why ESOPs again were not too exciting for most employees, right? But like I said, over the last year and a half to 2 years, the concept of ESOP liquidity has been slowly coming in. So a lot of the later stage startups, Series D, Series E, and above, a lot of the unicorns, what they've been doing is that they've been doing very regular ESOP buyback or ESOP liquidity programs. So what a lot of the companies do is that, and given that funding activities become so sort of active, especially for later stage companies, as they do a round of funding. So if I'm looking to raise $50 million, I tell my investors, I want to hold back $2 million to provide liquidity to my employees. That's becoming like a standard practice, and most of the larger companies are doing it. Then they go to the employees and say that, you know what, your ESOPs actually have a lot of value because I'm going to raise capital every year. And every year I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to sell your ESOPs to the investor and make money, right? So that's the way people have approached liquidity. The way we want to approach liquidity, and that is part of what our vision is as well, apart from software, which you've just sort of seen. to create an opportunity to provide structured liquidity, to say that on a yearly basis, startups will work with capital. Capital help find the buyers for the ESOPs, and we can help make a transaction happen, where you can actually go and announce it to your employees to say that every year we will provide liquidity in partnership with capital. So that is our aspiration. Hopefully we'll get there in the next 6 to 8 months or so. Coming to specifically your company, Chaitanya, if you don't intend to raise capital, right, I think the right thing to do at a certain point of time, and you can decide what it's going to be. It can be like, maybe 4 years or 5 years after people have got their ESOPs or the grants have been made, or 2-3 years after the vesting has happened. Maybe you can reserve a portion of your internal accruals, your profits, etc., to do takeouts from employees. Again, you don't need to do all of it in one go. You can, and the way companies typically approach it is to say that, okay, let's say 25% of the vested ESOPs, I will buy back in a certain year, and I'm going to set aside a certain portion of my cash to ensure that that happens. Just to tell the employees that, yes, you guys have been with me for 4-5 years, you have vested your ESOPs, you have seen the company grow from, let's say, 20 crore to 200 crore. So I will do a fair valuation of the company. I'll get an independent valuer to value the company, and on whatever value gets thrown up, I will give you guys an exit. So that could be, one way where you can approach it. Because in an invested company, even the employees are sure that, the investors definitely will ask for an exit. So when an exit happens, either a larger transaction or an IPO happens, all of us get to monetize. So they have that visibility and they have the little bit of conviction. Where you don't raise capital, then an employee may actually question you to say that, okay, then what happens if you just let my ESOPs remain ESOPs for 20 years or for 10 years? Where is the commitment to actually convert this ESOP into cash? So it might help for you to actually go out and do that. But that is, as I said, subject to your cash accruals and subject to, when you decide is the right time to give exit to.
I just sent a link as well, so, adding on to what Vikram said. So there's a company I had actually, interacted with, which actually was a bootstrap profitable company, and it chose SARs to actually give liquidity to their employees. In a way, every year they said this much percentage of our profits we'll allocate for liquidity. So do check it out, and Chaitanya, we can chat again.
I think that's a question on. Yeah, sorry, Chaitanya.
One additional quick question. I will take more time from you guys. So, is there a possibility of sort of an internal sort of marketplace that you guys can even sort of enable? Because see, when I think of, okay, someone else from outside the company will buy those shares, well, the employees will definitely get liquidity. There's no question about it. But there is some anxiety in the founder's mind saying who's going to come in, right? And it may not be many number of shares, but I think it will be a good idea if there is a platform to facilitate like internal market, right? So other employees may want to buy it, even former employees may want to buy those shares. Maybe some of the other current investors may want to buy those shares and things like that. But anyway, this is just a thought.
No, absolutely. I think we are thinking on similar lines, to let employees purchase, to let founders purchase, right? So you may have seen your stake go to a certain level. A way in which founders can increase their stake is to acquire from employees. So apart from the company putting out the cash, maybe your personal resources can sort of go there as well. So we have a lot of aspirations for internal marketplaces, create marketplaces for angel networks, for very closed group of startups, just to sort of transact between themselves for personal liquidity. But absolutely great suggestion, and great to see that we are thinking on similar lines. Yeah, that's just.
Thanks, Srikanth, for the link.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Just one more question on a company with 2 business lines. So absolutely, you can make your ESOPs performance linked, or even when you think about ESOPs, you can treat it differentially to tell the product team that, okay, you get a certain quantum here. While the services team may have generated cash flows for the company, I expect the valuation of the company to, let's say, be driven by the product team, hypothetically speaking. So maybe that can be reflected in the ESOP allocation as well. Or like I said, to have performance-based ESOPs and set the parameter of performance. So the parameter of performance for a mature, let's say, services business could be revenue, EBITDA, cash flow. The parameter for a product business could be like future valuation, a next round of fundraise, or some level of traction in terms of user metrics or something like that. So you can create 2 different classes of ESOPs, 2 different ESOP schemes itself, if you will, and cover different employees and treat them differently. So that is absolutely possible.
Sure. Any more questions before we wind up? Pago Analytics team is super happy with the webinar. So just keep in the comment box. Sure, we can have a one-on-one too with Srikanth and Vikram. I think you have my
Definitely.
mail ID.
And you can also check out our website, and you can also find us
Yeah.
on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. So
Just
do reach out.
dropping in the website of Capita. So
Yeah.
check them out. But before we wind up, any questions? Because I'm going through simultaneously, I'm going through all the questions that founders raised in the form
Oh yeah,
itself.
that will be helpful, Arti. Yeah.
Yeah, but more, guess what? You've covered all of them.
Oh, wonderful.
I've checked it twice, but yeah. So, if someone has questions, that would be great to like take it up, maybe. Or I have I keep having like this coffee with current kind of questions. So if they're like, if you can highlight three mistakes that generally founders make in terms of ESOPs, what could that be?
So
Yeah, I told you it's like coffee with current kind of question.
So one mistake could be to not provision for ESOPs as they raise funding, especially if they do friends and family round, or if they do even an external equity round where for whatever reason this doesn't appear as an obligation. What may end up happening is that you may get a bunch of investors before creating an ESOP pool. Then once you create an ESOP pool, those investors get diluted, and then you may get pushback. And then people come back and say that what, I've already issued shares. Now I want to create a pool, but my investors are telling me I can't create this pool. So now my investors are telling me that I have to contribute out of my stake and set aside something for a pool, right? It is possible there are workarounds, there are solutions to it, but a lot of those solutions result in taxation in the hands of the founders, etc. I think one I would say mistake to avoid is really think about ESOPs early. Make up your mind in terms of, let's say, giving out ESOPs early. But definitely, as you raise funding from other sources, from external sources, to make up your mind and actually, let's say, either create an ESOP pool, or if you're not going to go ahead and do it, then consider other alternatives like SARs, etc., which may not be diluted to investors. I would say that is one, let's say, mistake which people can avoid. Another, I would say, I won't call it a mistake, it's more of a practice, is to, let's say, be a little bit secretive about the whole value, ESOPs, etc. element. It's like a duality for founders. They want to do ESOPs and they want to create a world-class organization, but they're worried that my employees will actually know what my share valuation is, and they know what price I'm raising or what valuation I'm raising funding. And what if my employees come and ask me saying that oh, you know what, I came in at a certain value, but I expected like a 3x growth. You only gave me a 2x growth, or something like that. I think it's just a question of management of expectations and communication. I think today employees who are at least looking at startups are mature. They do understand that there's a risk associated with working with startups, and they do understand that there is risk with ESOPs as well. While I can make a 5x, 10x upside on my ESOPs, at the same point of time, it can even go flat. And it can be at the same value for the last 2-3 years if for whatever reason I've not been able to raise funding, or my value remains the same, right? So I think that is increasing maturity. So even if not, I think the best thing from a founder's perspective is to really communicate, right? Even when you give guidance in terms of value, even our platform has very disclaimers. And even when we speak to employees, we do highlight those disclaimers to say that, bear in mind you're taking a risk. That's why you're getting a 10x upside. You are taking a risk, the same risk which the founder is taking. It can result in an upside, or it can be, it can result in nothing as well. So I would say that's probably another thing, say from a mistake perspective. Srikanth, anything you want to add here? Maybe for the third mistake.
Yeah, three mistakes of ESOPs. No, but a couple of them actually was on both valuations and taxation. Sometimes they're not as understood by an uninitiated founder, right, who has not done ESOP before. So one is like this whole concept of option valuing, and that you have to reflect it into your P&L. So you need to take, and hence you need to also take necessary registered valuations. Like one is at the time of giving ESOPs, you need to have a registered valuer basis which you are actually calculating. So you need to have a fair value there. And also second is at the time of exercise, you need to have a merchant banker valuer, because there's an income tax angle. So these things, they should be part of the SOP. Not every founder knows it. So that is one. And second is the taxation involved itself, where there's a withholding responsibility of the company. that also is sometimes overlooked, and that could lead to non-compliances. So these are, I mean, these are again not something that you do on a daily basis, but you need to be aware of this. Of course, if you have a good finance team, they will take care of this. But as founders, obviously, the onus is on you. So these are just, I'd like to add to what Vikram mentioned.
Thank you so much. Here we come to an end of the session. We're already 15 minutes cross on the time. But on a closing note, I see it's high time for founders to think very seriously about ESOPs, because on a bigger picture, if I see human capital for startups, especially scaling state startups who are braced, they're finding it difficult to hire senior people or, people who can match their requirements, because on the other side of the pool, employees now have too many offers maybe, or too many fluctuating things in that HR field itself, because it's disrupted somehow with the advent of COVID, right? So ESOPs directly or indirectly will make a strong case as startups, and why someone need to choose us, and how we can be better prepared is what I thought this webinar would add, and it really added so much value to me and my startups too. So Kapita team, thank you so much, Vikram and Srikanth, as always. Looking forward to connect with you all the startups. I already got like 6 DMs here and also on the mail. So I will connect you for sure. And for everybody who joined us, thank you so much. And as always, you can reach out to me and we'll see how we can take it up. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Have a
Pleasure
nice
speaking
Friday,
to you.
guys. Bye.
See you then.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye.